Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Danville City Commission for this evening, Monday, June the 25th, 2018. The hour is 5:31, and I believe I barely have quorum. I expect Commissioner Cottle to skate in at any moment as Commissioner Terry is on vacation. So with that, I would ask that we be led in a moment of prayer by Commissioner Atkins.
Thank you. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to serve our community and to lift up praises in your name. We thank you and ask you to be present in this meeting, and we ask that whatever we decide to do or whatever happens tonight, that it be pleasing in your sight. These and all the blessings I ask in his name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Wait.
There he is, right here. Yeah.
You're late.
What am I doing?
What are you doing? You're the chairman. We've made 4 committee assignments. You're the chair. You're leaving. I'd ask that Steve Klein come and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, sir.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Commissioner Atkins. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the passing of the Honorable George McClure. His memorial service Sunday at 2 p.m. I don't think you could have captured the essence and the spirit of the man any better than what was delivered during what could be called a really entertaining memorial. And our own Commissioner Cottle added his brand of levity to the situation, and George would have had it no other way. Good man, and the community is a little lesser for his passing. Commission, you have before you the agenda. With your approval, tacit approval, I will move on with that. Agreed? Okay. We are in the section we call Hear the Public to speak on any item that's on tonight's agenda. There is an opportunity later, after we conduct most of our business, for the public to have an opportunity on any subject that's not on the agenda. So, does anyone like to address the commission about any agenda item? Seeing not, we'll move right on into item 1, which is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, that being June the 11th. Chair will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion is made by Commissioner Sears, second by Commissioner Cottle. Discussion, additions, corrections? Seeing none, Chair will call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 2 is a cemetery rate adjustments discussion. Mr. Scott?
Yes, sir. Mayor and Commissioners, in your packet is a memo from me dated June 21st, 2018 regarding the recommendations on changing fees affecting our cemeteries. You would recall that back a couple of months ago, our chair of the Cemetery Committee, Gail Lewis, made a presentation to the City Commission and made a number of recommendations. Generally speaking, those recommendations for change were as follows. Number 1, to increase and make uniform fees between Hilldale and Bellevue the same for the cost of grave sites. That's the sale of the grave sites. 2, to increase fees for city services such as opening and closing of graves and interment of cremation remains. 3, to authorize the sale of single graves sites instead of continuing the present requirement of requiring purchase of 2 at any sale. And 4, to consider construction of a cemetery pavilion or similar structure at our cemeteries as was recommended by our last and now somewhat ancient cemetery master plan. We looked at these recommendations from the viewpoint of what other cities were charging, and it's important to note that as far as we could determine, cemetery service fees have not been increased since 1990, which is a considerable period of time for the city to continue to provide the service with no increase. And so after looking at the rate structures in place currently for other cities and considering the recommendations, I am deviating rather substantially from those recommendations made for some reasons I'll note. First of all, the recommendation that I'm making to you after reviewing our present rates and those of other cities is that we increase fees for the selling of graves only by 10%. Given that fees have not been increased since 1990, that might be viewed as a very modest increase in the sale of graves. And all city services be increased by 15%. That would be the opening and closure of graves, which involves our manpower and equipment, or scattering of cremation remains. And again, those have not been increased to our knowledge since 1990. We didn't really accept the recommendation to increase all sale of cemetery lots to a uniform price because, excuse me, that would have the unintended consequence of disproportionately increasing the cost of graves in Hilldale Cemetery compared with the increased prices for graves in Bellevue. So accordingly, we're just recommending a modest and uniform 10% increase in those sale of grave sites in both cemeteries. And finally, with regard to the fourth recommendation, we are not yet in a position to recommend the construction of a pavilion or any other structure in the 2 cemeteries. Recall that a couple of months ago, we did purchase the lot going into Bellevue, and we've not really had a considered discussion yet regarding what might be the best and highest use of that property. So that could be a consideration as we work through that in the next fiscal year. The attachment to my memo shows the effect of the 10% increase in grave spaces. For example, in Hilldale Cemetery, the current fee for a city resident is $325. The proposed 10% increase would result in a gravesite charge of $358. In Bellevue, we have differing prices depending on which section you're in, but the most expensive section, which is U, V, and W, the current price per grave space for a city resident is $750. With a 10% increase, that would go to $825. Out of city residents pay more. Currently, they pay $1,500 per grave sites in those sections, and that would go to the recommended amount of $1,650. The final page of the attachment talks about the services being increased 15%. We presently charge during the weekday for opening and closure of graves, which requires us to typically use a backhoe and 1 or 2 persons to assist in that. The current fee is $600. The proposed 15% adjustment would make that $690. For example, the cremation, just scattering of ashes, currently we charge $25. With the 15% increase, that would be $29, and there are various other fees associated with that. It is important to note that because of our overtime requirements, we typically do not, try not to do Sunday burials or Saturday burials because it gets into the overtime, and Sunday I have to approve those, but we do charge a bit of higher fee for work when we have overtime requirements. So I'm happy to answer any questions or respond to any questions. Earl may be a better person to respond as he's been involved longer with these and supervises the staff that provides the services.
Let me first ask that we get a motion and a second to accept Mr. Scott's report, and then we can have a more in-depth discussion. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by Commissioner Cottle, second.
Second.
Mr. Atkins, we are in discussion.
There's a difference of 10% and 15% on services. Is that from the study of looking at other cities instead of 10% all the way across?
It is. We have, in the period of time since 1990, of course, we've had a lot of increase in our equipment and our staffing cost and so forth. So it's a little bit more, but still, I think, well in line with what other cities charge. And it got a little cumbersome to try to present the variety of those. And so I thought I would simply recommend just a modest increase in that category.
I have 3, if not 4 points. Not adjusting costs since 1990 is actually doing a disservice to the public because we're not using the taxpayer, not doing the taxpayer right. There's certainly no reflection on you. Thank you for catching this. Is there anything else out there that you can think of that hasn't been addressed since 1990?
Yes, and probably it has a equal or greater cost impact, and we have a number of fire contracts that have not been increased for those fire services we render to industry that are not contained in the city limits and that do not pay occupational taxes or that sort of amount of money to help subsidize the cost of doing that. It has been probably 12 to 15 years or longer since those have been looked at. I started to look at them a few years back and almost got to the point of making a recommendation, but somebody else came along and I put it aside. But we're out at those industries quite frequently, some of those, and that's probably due for an examination this summer or early fall.
And because this is an area of interest to me, the cemetery, as you know, even with these increases, we are still well below market on these types of services and these plots. Secondly, and we've touched upon this briefly in the past, many cemeteries don't sell lots, they lease the space. And it seems to me that because in the past so much of the problems that have occurred with respect to keeping the cemetery the way people would like to see it is due to the fact that we don't have control because we sell those lots. Is that something we could look into?
We certainly can, if the commission wishes us to examine the basis of making those available to the public. We certainly can. Now, you and I might have a slight difference of opinion on that. We've talked about that.
Won't be the first
prior
time.
years. But I mean, you know, if you've got a perpetual lease, it's not much different than the sale of property, other than you might assume greater opportunities for doing things if you own the property. But the regulations under which the property is sold should communicate the restrictions and those opportunities. So it may not be that it's simply a difference between lease or selling. It's a question of improved communication on what is allowed under that sale of lots.
I would agree with that, but in my limited research, everyone I've talked to has been surprised that we sell. Everybody else leases, as far as the ones.
Well, and there's two schools of thought on that. And older cemeteries, like ours is in the city of Danville, tended to sell. If you were to start a new cemetery, you perhaps would set them up as a license, not a lease. It's a license that you would grant. But in all consequences, it would be a rose by any other name. Because, for instance, if you buy a ticket to a concert, you don't have an ownership right to the seat that you're in. You have a license to use it for a particular time period. And the point being, if you scalp the ticket, if you bring alcohol in, it can be revoked and they kick you out. Well, in all practical intents and purposes, that consequence does not exist for a cemetery plot. if you have a family member who doesn't abide by the rules and regulations, you're not going to remove the body. At least I don't think you are. So we can discuss how the best way to set it up would have been, whether it's a fee simple interest or it's a license. But in all essence, you're still going to have the same terms and conditions. And without having the ability to remove someone, which you're not going to do, it's really a red herring of an issue. And the real issue is the rules and regulations of the cemetery. In communication, I would agree. Although I would agree with you that current cemeteries and new cemeteries do sell licenses to use them, so they retain full ownership over the whole body. But it doesn't, the type of deeds that we grant are still subject to all the terms and conditions that they would be if a license were granted. So I would say for the city in our existing cemeteries that ship is sailed. It would be too hard to put that genie back in the bottle.
And thirdly, I know we've referenced the new acreage that we purchased just to the right of the entrance. And I know we've talked that we've got a drainage issue we need to fix first before we can really do anything further with that. I'd like to, as we're getting that drainage issue fixed, can we begin some kind of a plan as to, once we get the drainage fixed, this is what we're going to do?
Certainly. It would be a recommended plan for discussion,
Right.
obviously, before the city commission.
Obviously. That's the end of my comments.
Ron, you said the cemetery committee made these 4 suggestions. In talking about fees, did they suggest a 10 or 15% increase, or?
They suggested that the sale, for example, of cemetery lots be made uniform, and that in itself would be much greater than a 10% increase between the 2 cemeteries. And they also suggested an amount to increase, and I don't know, Donna, if you recall, $800, which is more than we're recommending that it be adjusted to.
They recommend it be uniform and it be $800?
Yes.
For a wow. That's
Now,
major.
I think that's out of the viewpoint that it costs a lot of money to run a cemetery. We need beautification efforts. We need a lot of paving. We need a lot of activity, and probably reflects some frustration on the part of that committee at the perceived or actual slow pace at which the city is going about making those improvements. But it just seemed to me and to other staff that it was asking a little bit too much too quickly.
Yeah.
Have you talked with them since
I
you're?
meant to, but I have not. So I meant to call Gail Lewis or send her a copy of this report. My slight handicap was that I had my memo in Word format, but I didn't have the chart, which was prepared in another manner, so I couldn't really fully easily send that to her, so I just didn't get to that.
I was just wondering if you got any feedback, but, so.
Would that suggest that we're a little premature on a vote then?
It could mean that, yeah.
It's ultimately going to fall to us anyway, but I don't mind waiting until they've had time to comment or.
I would say the typical format is for committees to make recommendations,
Right.
staff to review them and make a proposal to you based on those regulations.
Mm-hmm.
There's really not a basis for returning to committee to vet the suggestion of staff after it's been recommended. The committee's act, I mean, unless you just.
Unless we reject the suggestion of staff.
Yeah.
That's right, that's right.
Which I don't think that you're saying that. So with that said, are you okay proceeding with any further comments or questions?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay. If there are no,
The reason why I raised my question is that if they suggested $800, are they anticipating being able to do some things with the increased revenue?
Well, quite possibly.
That's major.
They have high hopes or expectations in the budget itself that is on the agenda for consideration and hopeful approval later at this meeting. there are increased funds appropriated for them, not dependent on fees being generated, as we have to allocate general fund dollars each and every year. So I think they were maybe trying to accomplish several goals in terms of those recommendations. Simplicity, uniformity, increased revenue, being among those perhaps.
So in their proposal, on the Bellevue list, in sections M, N, O, P, and R, would have the same, would cost the same as sections U, V, and W?
Yes.
That's what their proposal was?
That was their proposal.
All lots would have the same price at any location in either cemetery.
And that would be a reduction in
Well,
cost for some sections then, right?
Well, I don't think it would be a reduction in any. Now, I'm not certain, Donna, maybe you can help me in terms of the non-city resident. I don't think they were proposing to reduce those.
No, and the rate, the $800 was, they proposed to, the opening and closing to go from $600 to $800. And then the graves would have been a uniform amount, I guess, set by Ron or, the staff. But she wanted it to be all uniform. So the
Oh.
lowest we have in city is $750. So I would assume it wouldn't be any less than that.
Okay.
So that would have the unintended consequence, I would say, or maybe not fully considered consequence of, in Hilldale, more than doubling the price of a lot.
And I guess the other thing is that we keep hearing from the citizens beyond just the cemetery committee about the pavilion type structure. So as soon as we can get into a position where we can move on some of that, that would be nice, because as well kept as our cemeteries are, that's probably one of the things that we're missing in both of them or all of them.
That would be very nice to have, I agree.
It would, yes, yeah. I was at the Harrisburg one just this past weekend. It was 90 degrees and whatever else, and it was like, wow, but once they got under the pavilion, okay. All right, thank you.
Anything further? If not, Chair, call the question. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 3 is the second reading of ordinance number 1914. This is the TransNav incentive. Madam Clerk?
This is the second reading of ordinance 1914, an ordinance pursuant to the Kentucky Business Investment Act, KRS 154.32-010 to 154.32-100, granting TransNav Technologies Incorporated a wage assessment, granting certain employees of company a partial credit against City of Danville occupational license tax, and providing provisions for recapture of these benefits in certain events.
I move for approval of the second reading of ordinance 1914.
Thank you, Mr. Cottle. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Sears, thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Atkins?
Yes.
Mayor Paris?
Yes.
Commissioner Cottle?
Yes.
Commissioner Series?
Yes.
Item 4 is the second reading of ordinance number 1915. This is the fiscal year 18-19 budget. Again, Madam Clerk?
This is the second reading of ordinance 1915, an ordinance adopting the City of Danville, Kentucky annual budget for the fiscal year 7/1/18 through 6/30/19 by appropriating funds for the operation of city government.
Roll call, please.
Need a
Need a
motion?
motion and a
Need a
second.
motion, sorry.
I move for approval of the second reading of ordinance 1915.
Motion made. Commissioner Cottle, second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Sears.
That was a slow second.
Jade's over there
Roll
studying.
call, please.
Mayor Paris?
Yes.
Commissioner Cottle?
Yes.
Commissioner Sears?
Yes.
Commissioner Atkins?
Yes.
First reading of ordinance number 1916. This is the compensation classification for fiscal year 18 and 19. Mr. Scott.
There is the statutory requirement that in conjunction with the adoption of a budget, that the city have adopted a pay and classification plan that would govern the expenditures of all its employees. This is that amended plan that is recommended for your adoption tonight. In the budget that we presented earlier, we talked about a number of new positions or modified positions that were included in the budget, and the desired compensation ranges for those employees. And looking at our current employees, this is the recommended amendment to our existing comp plan.
Do I hear a motion?
I move to accept first reading of ordinance 1916.
That's Commissioner Sears, second.
Second.
Thanks, Commissioner Cottle. We're in discussion?
What? Go ahead.
I want you to go ahead.
I was just going to, for the record, note that it does not include public safety. This is all but public safety. That's a different issue altogether, at this time anyway.
There is the expressed desire from public safety to have considered changes in their pay and compensation, and we're committed to doing that. This is a continuation of the existing pay and class for all employees, including public safety, but no changes are particularly proposed at this time for public safety.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any further discussion?
I think it needs to be pointed out that we also are separating the city clerk and the human resources director position into two full-time positions now, according to this new listing.
Along with that comment, I have a question. Who acts as an assistant city manager in your absence? The mayor or somebody on staff?
It would not be an elected official because
Okay.
it would be incompatible office. There is no position of assistant city manager, so it's not in the pay and class position. I believe in prior situations where you've had a vacancy occur due to resignation or retirement or other reason for medical or so forth, the city commission by agreement has appointed a member of staff, and those have been different staff members at different times to serve in that capacity. So that.
Yeah, I bring it up as something I think we ought to think about, and I'm not talking about you're leaving, I'm just talking about a week's vacation or whatever. It seems like an assistant city manager should be named, or somebody / on their other title. So,
Well, I would say, Commissioner, that my employment contract does give me the opportunity, to appoint one of the staff members to serve in that capacity and to attend city commission meetings, for example, in my absence. I would say, with the exception several years ago of a 10-day trip to Ireland, I have almost never been absent longer than 5 days, but I do anticipate being away in July for a period of time for a wedding. So it may be that it is helpful and clarifies authority and operations that that person be named in my absence.
You looking for the job?
no, no, like you, I've done a little homework, and some cities have taken the position of either the human resources or city clerk and slashed it, so somebody who knows what's going on in your office, and that way you don't have to be bothered on vacation. They can probably handle things.
I think that's been the practice of the city. I mean, not just for city manager Ron Scott, but prior city managers, that the city clerk acts in the absence of the city manager, or tries to keep things afloat through vacations and things of that nature. I agree, though, when there's been a resignation or something of a retirement, typically the commission makes some type of official designation. But just from the daily things, doctor's appointments, vacation, those types of things, sick days, I think the city manager or the city clerk tends to keep things afloat for the city manager in his absence.
I would certainly agree with that. And in the city itself, as we have a management team, that's the accepted norm, and that's the process we have informally followed in the past.
And if I can read across the lines correctly, are some of the class titles and their grades being reduced?
I don't think they have been reduced. There has been, in the IT department, for example, on page 3, there's a new classification of Information System Director, which is the manager of the IT department. And there, there was the prior IT tech class of 24, and that has been increased to 26. The network administrator is the new, or will be, the new information system director. So you basically eliminated that and had a higher job class there.
What about on page 1?
The only difference is the city engineer went to, from a 34 to 33, and the utility engineer went to a 34 on the second page, where they added, that's an
The
add.
city engineer is, you said the city engineer went down one. And what was the other one?
On page 2, the new position, utility engineer is at a 34.
So the city engineer and the utility engineer are on the same grade, that's what you're saying?
No, the city engineer is a grade 33, and the utility engineer is a grade 34.
Is there any further discussion?
Oh, yeah, hold on. The utility engineer is not in place yet, right?
We have not advertised or hired a new city engineer yet. That's a new position that is authorized under the budget.
Is there a reason that they're one pay grade different? Two engineers?
18 years of experience versus less experience for a city engineer.
Okay, so the grade is fitting the person? Okay.
Well, not only the person, but the breadth of responsibilities, I would say, also.
So we currently have someone in the utility engineer position?
We do,
Oh, okay, that's what my confusion. So we're gonna hire a new city engineer?
yes.
Oh,
That, you might recall, was a strong recommendation of the city commission in our retreat in November or December of the past year.
Correct, correct. Anything further? Seeing none, Chair will call the question. All in favor of the first reading? I guess you have to do that, don't you, Donna? Yeah,
I can do that.
you can do that.
Commissioner Cottle,
Yes.
Commissioner Series,
Yes.
Commissioner Atkins,
yeah, I'm gonna say yes, this is first reading. Okay.
Mayor Paris.
Yes. Item 6 is first reading of ordinance number 1917. This is the alcohol regulatory fee for fiscal year 18 and 19. Mr. Scott?
There is a statutory requirement that all cities levying an alcohol regulatory fee reenact that fee annually, and there are restrictions upon increasing that unless the city can demonstrate the need to do so in the way of expenditures in regulating alcohol. This is a simple reenactment of the existing fee based upon the statutory requirements that the city do so annually.
Do I hear a motion?
I move for approval of ordinance number 1917.
Thank you,
First
Mr.
reading,
Atkins.
first reading.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thanks, Commissioner Cottle. We're in discussion. Any questions?
Yeah, this isn't increased, is what I thought I read.
Does not increase or change.
So we're just, this is just a formality, we're keeping it the same. And since I have the microphone, I'm and maybe this is a Michelle question, but seems like in expenses, we've got police department listed 3 times and quite a lot of money. Kind of curious why.
They're listed on how we figure it out. We have what we call direct expenses, which are expenses that are directly, we bought this at 100% for alcohol. If we didn't have alcohol money, we would not be buying these items. And the second expense for, you have capital and non-capital operations that are police department, which we deem as 35%. Of course, you don't remember because you wasn't here, but we've added several officers just because of alcohol. And that was mentioned when we opened up the hirings for those officers. And then the chief goes through his calls and gives me a percentage, and if the percentage is at a very conservative number. And then we also have expenses that go through our codes department, as your codes director is also your ABC director. It has to do with all that kind of stuff. And so we have a percentage of that budget also that's a very conservative number that goes towards alcohol. And we're required to be reasonable. So that's the reason we use the very conservative numbers, and they meet all the regulations to keep the money the same, the percentages the same.
And the reason I ask is alcohol being in Danville has been good for economic development, but by your statement sheet, we're a little bit upside down, so I wanted to know if there was a real numbers or...
Yes, they are real numbers.
Okay.
That is normal. But it also, you don't see the other other help that brings in it. That doesn't count food sales, shopping sales, and other kinds of items that happen. That is alcohol-only money coming in.
Any further questions or
Wait,
comments?
did you understand that answer?
No.
Well, my interpretation of that answer is that alcohol fee doesn't fully pay for the activities of the police department or the regulatory fees. And so
Yes.
we have to demonstrate that
Yes.
in order to increase those fees, and we're showing a deficit, but not proposing to raise fees.
Yeah.
They're basically subsidized by our other general fund revenues.
Absolutely. You could, based on the numbers, you could raise the fees. We're not suggesting that you do so, though.
I'm not looking at it negatively. I still think this has been good for our city. It's just that those numbers, when you see the police 3 times, I'm wondering if some of that's just assumed money, and that's what I wanted to
No,
know.
that's how we have to do it in order to make it, because we have to, how we have to book it in the general ledger. I could put it all on one line if you wanted me to, but that's how it comes out.
Anything further? Seeing none, Chair call the question. Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Series,
Yes.
Commissioner Atkins?
Yes.
Mayor Paris?
Yes.
Commissioner Cottle?
Yes.
Item 7 is the foreclosure discussion of property 222 East Martin Luther King. Ms. Lester?
Good evening. I just wanted to bring this property back. We do have this property under contract for demolition. We've had some problems with the gas, but that should be taken care of, and it should be demolished this week. But it was among all those other properties that you approved for foreclosure, so this was one that was left over. So I wanted to see what the pleasure of the city commission was, so you could direct the city attorney.
So you need a motion.
As far as I know, that's all we need, is a motion to direct the city attorney to start foreclosure proceedings.
Do I hear such motion?
Is
We
that
didn't find
just
out
a
any
motion?
no new information was gained about this one, right?
We had more conversations with the family members, but they were not able to take care of any of the liens or anything like that, so it's the last one that we had talked about previously that it will be demolished.
Do I hear a motion?
I move that we ask the city attorney to begin foreclosure proceedings on 222 East Martin Luther King Boulevard.
We have a motion by Commissioner Cottle. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Commissioner Atkins. Discussion.
I was just hoping it was gonna be saved myself, but I can't do it, but, yeah. It's a unique-looking house.
No further comments. I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 8 is resolution number 2018-06-25-01. This is the Certified Local Government Sub-Grant Award. Ms. House.
Good afternoon,
Oh, there you
evening. I already came up. Well, the good news is we received the grants. We will be receiving a $2,500 grant from our certified local government folks at the Kentucky Heritage Council, which we will match with $1,667 of staff time, which is my effort and work. And we're going to be bringing to the city a series of workshops to help with the historic structures in Danville and hopefully expand out into Boyle County. Hopefully do those in September, October, when it's cooled down. Everybody seems to like it when it's a little cooler. And so do I. I guess we need a motion to accept that.
We do. Do I hear such motion?
I move to accept resolution number 2018-06-2501.
We have a motion by Commissioner Sears and a second by Commissioner Atkins. We're in discussion. Thanks for doing this.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No further discussion. Chair, call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 9, City Manager Report. Mr. Scott.
Yes, sir. Tonight, I would request that the City Commission hold a special call meeting on Thursday, July the 5th at 5:30 p.m. here at City Hall. Purpose of that special call meeting would be for the city staff to present to the City Commission and the public attending the proposed location of our city's new main administrative fire station and also present a long-range plan for the provision of professional fire services to our residents. That meeting might take 2 hours, give or take, but it's important that we have that meeting to discuss that plan of locating fire station and the long-range plan for providing fire services.
You said the 5th at what time?
Yes, Thursday, July the 5th at 5:30.
5:30?
There goes my vacation.
What's that?
The second thing I would like to mention, and I hope that date will work because we need a bit more time to finalize that presentation, but not too much time. We need to get it before the community and have some discussion about that. And so that would be, I think, the most opportune time for holding that discussion. As we've discussed over the last few months, particularly, we're awaiting the final Parks and Recreation Master Study Report. We anticipate having that delivered to the city on or before the end of July. And I would, July 31st, I'm not sure it's the exact date of that delivery, but that suggests that we would have a presentation by Branstetter Carroll before the City Commission, presenting that report to you as you paid for the report to be conducted at perhaps that first meeting in August. That'd be August 13th, as I recall. Now, I would anticipate, as I'm sure you would, that there would be a discussion following that presentation, maybe some special meetings or workshops of the City Commission. Some of those might be jointly with the county as we fully engage the report's recommendations. And the third thing I would just mention is that earlier this month, the city staff and the Parks and Recreation staff had a very productive meeting here at City Hall. We agreed to meet monthly to talk about the ongoing work issues and the priorities of Parks and Recreation. We've scheduled our next meeting for, I think it's Monday, July the 2nd, I think that's right, with the Parks and Recreation staff, and I think the chair, Roger Ross, agreed to join us in that next meeting at least. These meetings, I think, are really important in order to develop a better understanding and a closer working relationship on priorities of the parks to meet the cash flow funding needs of Parks and Recreation, and to simply do a better job of coordinating our city support of Parks and Recreation. It has been the practice, I think, for a number of years for the chair or the staff or both to meet with the county to talk about these issues, and there's no reason why the city shouldn't emulate that good idea. So we're in the process of doing that. It's even more important to do so, I think, in the month of July, as we had intended to do, after the Parks and Recreation Director announced his retirement effective July 31st, and he told me earlier this month that he was planning to be absent the entire month of July. So I think that's a productive dialogue and will help us work together to have optimal outcomes, particularly in his absence, when I presume we're going to be transitioning to an acting director position there in the Parks and Recreation. I don't anticipate necessarily any change in the allocation of funds to Parks and Recreation of the quarterly. In past years, we've alternated that quarterly disbursement depending upon cash flow needs. It's probably going to still be largely necessary to do that on a quarterly basis, particularly as we have a large amount of bills beginning 1st of July. But I would say we'll meet quarterly, or rather disperse funds quarterly and meet monthly as we try to work together to make it a win for the community. And the third thing I would mention, this is later on the agenda, but we have on the agenda tonight, as the county did, the continuation of the Ad Hoc Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. That resolution that was adopted jointly by the city and the county, or the same resolution, I guess it was jointly, some 3 years ago, talked about the ad hoc committee being appointed for the purpose to consider all things relative to Parks and Recreation, which seemingly has had some different interpretation after its enactment. But the ad hoc committee agreed, and we followed that direction in the ad hoc committee, that we focus exclusively in the past on the capital improvement needs of Millennium Park, and we have done that for 3 years. And in our discussion of extending that ad hoc committee, we said, well, that's fine to extend it for the balance of calendar year 2018, as long as we still have the willingness of the city and the county elected bodies to meet and talk about the larger needs, the greater needs, the report recommendations. And so I think we anticipate continuing the ad hoc committee. There may not be much in the way of additional capital improvements to be made as we work out the balance of calendar year 2018, but certainly we're going to be presented, I presume, and I haven't seen the final report or even a draft of it, with some options or some needs or some greater challenges for our resources in the way of capital improvements going forward. So I have said, and our budget was constructed over the fact that we were setting aside money, but we want to see what is prioritized as recommendations of the Parks and Recreation Master Study before we necessarily agree prior to that time to any further improvements in Millennium Park. Now, I mentioned any further ones. We're making one, and that's why it's important that we meet with Parks and Recreation, as our city engineer has done so already with Mr. Drake, over the location of our beloved gazebo that we took out of Whisker Park, and we're planning to place that down there. And at this point, the city would totally fund that $25,000 construction cost, unless the county should agree to serve in that, sharing that expense. But increasingly, as we have brought all of the standards up to par there, there might be a little paving we would do next year, but we're pretty well caught up in Millennium, and we have great need elsewhere.
Any questions for Ron?
Yeah.
Are you considering putting the gazebo at Millennium Park this summer, this fall?
Yes.
Wow, that'd be nice. Didn't get lost, okay? I guess the other question is, and I don't know if you're prepared to answer tonight, how does the discussion proceed with the hiring of a new Parks and Rec director?
Well, I think there have been maybe some limited conversations on that question. It's an issue that I think the city and the county are going to have to come to terms with. I'm not sure that we have yet, and the Parks and Recreation Board. And hopefully, we would be receptive to maybe some sort of small meeting where we will have different ideas presented and take the best of those and proceed.
You perceive that, oh, I'm sorry.
You don't see that being well, I shouldn't ask you that question, but it needs to be expanded beyond just the ad hoc committee being responsible for it.
I think
What
it's
am I thinking?
broader than the ad hoc, and the
Well,
ad
me
hoc,
too.
by its own admission, has been, to date, solely interested in capital improvements, and I think this is a little bit of a broader discussion.
Yes, I agree.
If I may add, the original intention, as far as the city was concerned in drafting the ad hoc committee enabling resolution, was simply for dialogue on a concrete set of issues. I would stand by this position that the ad hoc committee has no standing or authority whatsoever to take any action formal for any body, period. No expenditure of funds, no vote on policy, but simply to make recommendations to each governing body for final decisions. I don't think I can be clearer in that statement. I don't think the resolution that enabled the ad hoc committee can be clearer than that statement. But any attempt to take action would be directly in violation of the enabling resolution. So I would caution the continuance of the meetings needs to be very limited in scope, merely to make recommendations to each governing body. And at such a critical time as now, I would think it'd be more appropriate, actually, for there to be joint meetings of both bodies so that true action can be taken and dialogue can be had in a very public process, as there are huge policy issues facing Parks and Recreation.
Yes.
With the coming of the study that's about to be finalized, the retirement of the executive director, there are big issues that go well beyond what the ad hoc committee was designed to initially look at some years ago. And if you remember, it was designated as a 6-month endeavor to review all facets of Parks and Recreation and to bring recommendations for improvement in Parks and Recreations back to each governing body for action after 6 months. It's been 3 years.
Yeah.
So you're going to vote on the extension of the ad hoc committee tonight, and my word of caution is simply that it is a body to make recommendations to you and the court for final decision-making, but it was never intended that that body be enabled to act. And quite frankly, it'd be contrary to law to do so.
Well said.
Yes.
But I would like for us to remember that the Parks and Rec Board should also be somewhat included in some of these discussions going forward. We appointed half of that board and the county appointed the other half.
Yeah.
I don't think that they should ever be excluded in any of our conversations personally.
No, and they weren't from the last joint meetings either. I mean, they were invited to the joint meetings, but obviously, Parks and Recreation Board is a creation of 2 governing bodies. At this juncture, it should be considered philosophically how that board should be structured. There is precedent, there's history at critical times of change where through joint meetings of both bodies, you take a step back at critical steps and you decide how to proceed as governing bodies. That's what you were elected to do, not unelected officials to do. I agree they should be included in the conversation. However, we also have to remember that ultimate authority on policy issues rests with you and the court.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. We'll move next into the section called Hear the Public. This is the opportunity for the public to have 3 minutes, 3 minutes of the glory about any subject that's not on the agenda.
Hello, my name is Nancy Davis, and I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of my sister, and I have a company called Serendipity Sisters, and we own that building that's next to the Community Arts Center. And I'm here to ask if there's any way the city would consider altering those little parking signs they put up about 1.5 years ago. There's 2 small signs there that limit parking to 15 minutes. I think there's about 10 parking spaces there for customers, I think, of the city business. There's twofold reason why I'm asking for this. One reason is that I usually park in there after you all close at 5, and I know that there's probably no issue with parking there, but we have a lot of people who come in from out of town to eat, and they're very nervous about parking over there. They don't park there because they're afraid to park there. They don't realize it's more than likely limited to business hours. So we tell them it's quite okay. Some of them spend time just trying to find a place to park. There's very few parking spots across the street from us, unlike most of Main Street where you have parking places on both sides. On the front of us, we have the fire department. There is one parking spot there that's limited, I think, to 15 minutes. And there's very few parking places, and there's only one light to cross. Some people do park across the street, and it's very hazardous trying to cross over to the restaurant. I want to make it clear that I do not own any part of Tut's Restaurant, nor does my sister, but we do have 3 tenants in the building. Most of the tenants have purchased a parking permit from John Bowling. That's $30 a month. We don't own the parking behind the building, so they do pay to park behind the building. However, it's also almost impossible to get in and out of city-owned business for 15 minutes. I know I was here in February last year at some kind of approval of a plat. There's no way I was in there much more than 15 minutes, so it's really doesn't even make sense to limit it to 15 minutes. There's very little business you can do if you walk in here at the city, try to get back out in 15 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Is that 3 minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
And then some.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. We own property.
Your name, please?
I'm sorry. My name is Lita Level.
Thank you.
And my husband and my father and I own property out on the South Bypass. It's where the Bluegrass Hearing Building is, if you all are familiar with that. And the road in front of it is simply atrocious. And I started working with Mr. Scott last August to try to get something done about this. I actually spoke with him at a meeting in Louisville and asked him if there was anything the city could do, because the road has not been blacktopped ever. I mean, for years and years and years, there's potholes. You'd have to drive out there to see it, but it's worse than any road that I go to on my farm. So he was very nice and chatted with me and emailed me back in a couple of weeks and told me that, yes, it was a city road, and that the city would be paving it either in the fall or in the spring. So needless to say, I was excited. And October came, and I noticed lots of paving going on around town, and nothing was going on out there, so I emailed him back October 4th, and he sent me an email saying it was not a city street. He had found out from Mr. Byerly that it was not a city street. So then I began emailing him back, well, then what do we need to do? You know, this was October. No answers, nothing. Email, nothing. Finally, in February, Mr. Coffey responded back to me and told me that we would get together. And that I said, okay, let's have a meeting. March 13th, we had a meeting. He told me he would get back to me in 2 weeks. Nothing. I sent him a message on March 27th, and he said he would update me Friday. Nothing. I sent him another message on April 16th, asked for an update. He said he met with the attorney and he would get back with me the end of April. Nothing. I sent him a message on May the 8th, asked the status, and he said he will let me know this week. Nothing. May 14th, I got a message that they're waiting on the Allen Company. June 5th, we're going to discuss it week after next. And this is June 25th, and here I am. So you can kind of understand my annoyance.
Okay.
And like I said, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but if you, I know Mr. Sears is familiar, but if you drive out there, it's
I'm familiar with it as well, so
It's,
understand, and I'm sure staff will look into it.
okay, so
Now, we'll continue on.
I'll be hearing back, or?
I feel confident you'll hear back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Give her your phone number.
Good evening. My name is Jane Brantley. I would just like to ask that the water wall in Wissiger Park be repaired to function at its full capacity. There's a whole section of water that has not been coming down for several weeks, and the water's difficult to see at best, but when about half of it isn't working, it's even harder to see. And if at all possible, if we could extend the size of the holes that the water flows in. I took a photograph this weekend in Lexington of the little water wall on the courthouse plaza that's constructed very similarly to what we have. And the flow of water is much heavier. It doesn't splash much. It doesn't get people standing near it wet, but it's very visible. And I know other citizens have had concerns about the lack of visibility of the water in that structure. It would take some redoing, but I think it would be better if we could at least have the whole thing running with water until we can get it even more visible. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? If not, we'll move into commissioner comments. Mr. Atkins? Age before beauty. Go right ahead.
You caught me off guard, Mr. Mayor.
That's all right. I'll go to Commissioner Cottle.
Here we are in the midst of summer, so there's not a lot of activity that I usually report on, but I would publicly wish our Executive Director of Parks and Rec well as he goes into his retirement.
Got anything?
I've been confined to my house for about 2 weeks, so I'm okay.
I want to thank Danville Police for, again, monitoring and making sure the race at the Wellness Center went off nicely. Thank you. Our thoughts are with the officer who was in the altercation, the automobile accident. My understanding is, Chief, he's okay. Thank you. And last Thursday, I had the pleasure of attending the Kentucky League of Cities Board of Directors meeting. About 70, almost 75 mayors there. Mostly the agenda was a review of this past legislative session, where the Kentucky League of Cities did a really nice job of representing the cities on our behalf. It was quite impressive. It was also a bit of a viewpoint looking forward to some of the issues that are coming down the road. One of those, and Ron, you may be more up to speed on, you probably are more up to speed on this than I am, but House Bill 151, which related to the pension, was obviously ruled unconstitutional by the Attorney General. Part of House Bill 151 was House Bill 362, which related to the phase-in from all the cities. Well, my understanding is that that may very well be in jeopardy as well. Now, that was as of Thursday, and today's Monday, and things changed. You have any other update?
Well, we have no other update. There is the potential that the phase-in would be challenged legally and overturned for procedural or other grounds, as the 151 was overturned and ruled invalid. We don't know that yet, and the J.D. Cheney, the counsel for the League of Cities, advised us and other cities to proceed as we are, based upon the current advice of the Kentucky Retirement Systems Board, and that is the last advice we received was that we were going to phase in our contribution rates. Now, that does not mean that there is not the potential, and maybe a pretty significant potential, that we might be doing a budget amendment sometime in the next in this current upcoming fiscal year. We may not know that until November, December, January, somewhere along. It'll be a while before we will know if we have to change anything or not. But if we do, we're kind of back almost to square one in terms of facing $750,000 increased contribution and pension contributions. So we are awaiting, I guess, developments.
We would call that a budget buster, wouldn't we?
It will crip our style in the current fiscal year and going forward because it is an annual allocation. Honestly, I don't know what the potential for that occurring will be. There's a great desire among the General Assembly, by evidence of passing 362, to not bankrupt cities throughout our land. And so if it were to be overturned, it might be simply that it would be reenacted. All of those things are possible. So we're trying not to overreact locally, but to continue based upon the prior decisions of the General Assembly, which seem to be in their collective wisdom, to give us some ability to pay more over time rather than a huge amount overnight.
Suffice it to say, it's an issue that we're watching as close as possible. And we are talking about Frankfurt, and we are talking about the judicial system, and who knows what comes out of that. So we'll see. That's the end of my comments. Anything else? Seeing none, we'll move into item 10. That's the payment of the bills. Do I hear a motion to approve the payment of the bills as presented?
I move for payment of the bills in the amount of $185,707.20 as presented.
Second?
Have a motion by Commissioner Cottle, second by Commissioner Atkins. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 11 is Resolution 2018-06-2502. This is with regard to the surplus items list and its approval. Donna, anything you want to talk about this?
No, the city surpluses items from time to time, typically every second year, and all of our items have to be surplus in order to get rid of them, whether they're trash or that we sell them. So that's what this is, and there was a list that followed that we've asked that you surplus.
Do you need to read that resolution? Okay. Do I hear a motion that we approve Resolution 2018-06-2502?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Sears. Comments, discussion, question?
I just wonder where you find all this stuff myself. It's a heck of a list.
Donna, people that are interested in this, how do they go about accessing the opportunity to purchase?
That'll be the next item on the list, on the agenda.
Okay. Then with that said, I'll call the question. All in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Now we'll go to next resolution, 2018-06-2503, the government deals memorandum of understanding. Now proceed.
Okay, this is something new for Danville. It's called GovDeals, and 263 cities in Kentucky use this system, which is an online auction, sort of like eBay. In the past, the city has had auctions held at Public Works where we've disposed of vehicles and items that are on our list, and we feel that this would be a better way because hopefully other cities are making more money off of their surplus versus us, putting a truck down at Public Works, not getting the word out nationwide, because I think GovDeals, they sent me a notice that they serve 11,417 governments that are a part of GovDeals, and of those, 263 are in the state of Kentucky that use the same process, which would be more of a, like I said, an eBay site that people would have access to go out and look at all of our items, and we could add them throughout the year versus just having to have one auction and storing the stuff.
Do I hear a motion for the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Sears. Second.
Second.
Mr. Cottle, discussion?
Commissioner Terry would be proud of you getting online and doing things.
If there are no further comments, Chair call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. We'll move on to item 13, Resolution 2018-06-2504. This is the Boyle County Health Department Contract Agreement. Again, Donna?
This is just a contract. We work with the health department in town to give our hepatitis shots A and B to our employees. Also for when we do flu shots and we do other vaccines, so that we would ask that you would approve that because their prices are a little bit lower, and we do biometrics with them also for our employees. So we'd ask that you approve that.
Do I hear a motion?
I move the approval of Resolution 2018-06-2504 as
Thank you, Mr.
presented.
Atkins. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Commissioner Cottle. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 14, Resolution 2018-06-2505. This is the Delta Dental Fiscal Year 18-19 renewal. Again, Donna.
We would ask that you allow us to renew with Delta Dental for our employees. We've not had a price increase since 2015, and this year it's a 2%, but we would still ask that you let us, or allow us to stay with Delta Dental for another year.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sears. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 15 is Resolution 2018-06-2506. This is the 4th Street Cell Tower Agreement Revision. Mr. Coffey.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. The cell phone company is requesting to change antenna on the tower. They want to replace 6 old antennas with 9 new ones. Staff recommends accepting the agreement. There's no cost change. There's nothing really burdensome to the city for the matter.
Do I hear a motion to the resolution?
I move approval of Resolution 218-06-2506 as presented.
Thanks, Commissioner Atkins. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Mr. Cottle. Discussion? Mr. Coffey, I trust this will improve their coverage.
Yes, sir. Appears to. They're adding services. They're increasing
Do we have that in
availability.
writing somewhere?
We
Supposed to, yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct.
We collect a
supposed
fee
to.
from them as well, don't we?
I'm sorry.
Do we collect a fee from them as well for
Yes, sir.
using our water
They
tower?
pay rent for use of that space.
If there are no further comments, call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 16 is the draft for discussion and/or action on ordinance number 1918, and this would be changes to our parking ordinance. Mr. Dexter.
Thank you, Mayor. As promised, in a draft format, I have before you staff's recommendation that came from the Parking Board to revise the applicable sections in the parking ordinance to require the display of a permit in all city lots. So you can see there are 3 particular sections that were changed. For instance, on page 2, you see this section that requires the displaying a valid permit on a vehicle's rear view mirror. And we added a requirement there. In the next section, it used to simply say, by those, the Board of Commissioners may establish by resolution areas where parking is allowed only by possessing a valid permit. And we added and display, so possessing and displaying. And then the last change is in the penalty section that changed the citation that was originally noted as improper parking by permit only to failure to display permit if parked in permit only space, being a $30 fee, which is what it was prior, but it also added the language to match that which is in the handicapped parking violation, to fine reduced to $15 if proof of permit shown. Again, that is the recommendation of the parking board before you.
Do I entertain a motion on ordinance number 1918?
Move, oh, go ahead,
You
Rick.
got it? You got it?
Go ahead.
Motion made by Commissioner Cottle, second by Commissioner Sears.
Thanks for the help.
It's good. That'll work.
Any discussion?
All right, do we have any discussion?
Seeing none, Chair call the... Excuse me.
We had, someone came before us 2 weeks ago about this. I guess my question is that if I have a sticker, is that sticker identifies that I'm assigned this particular spot?
It does not.
Any spot that's marked,
No, it does not.
so I can park at any spot that's marked?
In the city, in the lot which you have a permit to park in.
Right. So his issue was that he has multiple vehicles, and he only has the one sticker, which I understand why he only has one. And his suggestion was that if there's a fine attached to it, he brings proof of ownership to a parking sticker, that the fine be $1, right? Which is not a deterrent to not keep showing up and parking without your stickers. I understand that, so.
Well, let's get a clarification. According to this, it's not a sticker, is it? Is it something that hangs off your rear view?
Right.
That's
So it
correct.
can be moved from vehicle to vehicle.
Oh, I understand
Yeah.
that part, right, I understand
Yeah,
that.
oh, okay. All right.
In every parking lot I've ever been associated with outside of Danville,
Yeah.
you have to have your sticker.
That's right, I agree.
It's not the parking enforcement's guys or gals' responsibility
Yeah.
to remember what kind of car you drive, so I think it's reasonable.
The only other solution that I've thought of, and I don't know if it's practical or not, I mentioned it to Bridget, would be to possibly have lot enclosures that would simply have some type of magnetic key that would, like in the Farmers Bank lot, for instance, off of Walnut, in order for the arm to go up, you have to wave your wallet or your key ring or whatever the tag is that allows you into the lot to get access to it. So in theory, that way it wouldn't matter if you're driving car A, B, C, or D.
Yeah.
If you have the permit, then you can get in the lot as long as you have that coded.
And I
piece
will
with it.
reiterate my suggestion from the last meeting, and that is that we've got a whole lot more to do than to monitor parking lots, and I think we ought to subcontract it out like every other community does.
And we are looking into that potential.
Thank you. That'd take care of that problem, wouldn't it? All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, Chair, call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Item 17 is resolution.
Mayor, I'm sorry, that's an ordinance that's going to
Excuse me.
require a roll call vote, please.
Excuse me. Let me slow his train down.
He hit them eyeballs going, wait a minute, Mayor.
I'm trying to help you because we got an executive session tonight.
Y'all have one, right? I don't.
Sorry, Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Atkins?
Yes.
Mayor Paris?
Yes.
Commissioner Cottle?
Yes.
Commissioner Series?
Yes.
Now, item 17, Resolution 2018-06-2507. This is the Park Ad Hoc Extension. I believe we've covered this.
I believe we have.
So I'll move to accept this resolution 2018-06-2507.
And it extends it for another 6 months?
That was the proposal.
Okay, all right.
So,
Motion's made by Commissioner Sears. Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Cottle. We're in discussion.
It seems to me not too long ago, we had discussed the fact that this ad hoc board had perhaps reached the end of its usefulness. What has changed since then?
Not much. I think there is a desire on the part of the county members of the ad hoc committee to have it continue for the balance of the calendar year until December 31st because of the perception or the reality that there may be a few additional projects such as parking lot paving that they want to make sure is well coordinated by the committee. And again, as our council has said, really their job is not to administer programs, but we've gotten much closer to that concept more recently. So, but the bigger opportunity, I think, is that if we do have a study coming out on looking at parks and recreation from a bigger point of view, you know, they could perhaps also engage in those conversations some, if they're willing to do so, and kind of carry that back to the city and the county. I don't think that that's a substitute for the engagement of the full bodies of the city and the county, but they may help in that process. There is not going to be, from my point of view, a lot of capital improvements done in that 6 month. There will be a couple of small projects maybe, and in my opinion, we could proceed with getting it done just as we did before the ad hoc committee was created. But if we take greater comfort in meeting and talking about those things, we can, although the body has no administrative powers, as our council has expressed very well. And I think increasingly we've got kind of confused on that in the ad hoc committee.
Thank you.
And my support of it, because when we did it this additional 6 months, I wanted to go till the end of December to give it another year. It's just been so important to me to have city and county folks talk about parks and rec. You know, I was hoping for a very civil conversation, but at times I know it hasn't been that. But anytime we can get city and county folks to sit down and talk about this issue, I think we need to keep on driving it if we can. But I definitely agree with our city attorney that it's about bringing forth recommendations from that body. And my hope also would be that when this master parks plan is released, that both bodies find some really important reasons to continue as a joint bodies to meet together. Because I hope there's going to be a lot of work that we will feel a need to want to do.
Any further discussion?
While I don't discount the fact that the conversation and communication between the city and county on an issue as important as Parks and Recs is critical, I think when you look at the initial resolution, they were charged with a mission of bringing recommendations for improvement, both on public in improvements, organization, and there's yet to been one recommendation brought to this body. So now I think it's telling who should review. I think the philosophical question is this: who should review the master plan? And in what scenario, with who involved, at what table? Should it be the ad hoc committee? Or should it be both bodies independently and then jointly? The structure of the conversation is important. Who has it, when, where, and how, I think is critical. So whatever you decide, I think you just want to do so with some intentionality and thought about how that process should proceed. And again, I remind you, I'm not slighting the committee, because I understand that committees sometimes deviate from their original purposes and can accomplish other worthwhile tasks. And again, communication is a worthwhile goal, and it sounds like that has gone well for the most part. My only question is, they were charged with a specific task of bringing recommendations to you, and none have been brought. So how long do you continue to meet under a format that has generated essentially no recommendations to you? You're about to receive a master study that's probably going to have a lot of recommendations, I would say. To me, before you vote, I think you should be mindful of who should review those and in what format, and is it better served at the joint meeting of both bodies after a thorough independent review, or should it be through the filter of the ad hoc committee? I don't know the answer. I'm posing the question.
No doubt we are at an inflection point on a number of fronts with regard to Parks and Rec. As you've referenced, we've got a new study coming sometime mid or end of July. First time we've had that done in 20 years. We've got a task in front of us to get a new executive director, to which I'd like to know what's going to be the process for that. How are we going to solicit and interview candidates for that? Should the city and the county have a role in that? I don't know. These are questions that we're at that inflection point where a lot of these questions in my mind come to the surface, and I think we have to address them some way. But I'm not hearing any talk about a process. And as I understand it, our existing executive director will be out the month of July, and he's announced his resignation July 31. So basically, we've got about 6 or 7 days. I understand that duties have been shifted within the Parks and Rec staff, but you still got to have an executive director somewhere. Somebody's got to be the general in the group. Mr. Scott, you getting ready to say something?
Well, in terms of the ad hoc committee, of which I'm a member and the mayor's a member, we have had, I think, some very good meetings, some perhaps non-productive meetings, I'll just say that, over some issues. But we have been talking, and I do think while we didn't come out with any great recommendations for Parks and Recreation to be considered by the city or the county, one thing that did occur as a result of the ad hoc committee meeting was an increased understanding of the deficit or the need to make capital improvements in Millennium Park. And I think we recognized as a committee, and perhaps indirectly by the city and the county, after we had the initial enthusiasm of buying and investing in Millennium Park, we sort of hit the pause button. The recession happened, and so we came back after that and said we need to do some things, and those things have been good that we've done together, jointly, or separately. And so I think that understanding was helpful in terms of indirectly shaping the budgets of the city and the county over these past few years in terms of capital improvements in those. Beyond that, and again, not to repeat unduly, but the ad hoc committee made the determination they were only going to focus on capital improvements, and that was short of the global charge given to them, but that was their priority, and we've done that. So I think there's, again, very little additional capital improvements going to be made in the next 6 months, but there may be a few. And I'll share with you that I had a conversation with members of the fiscal court and said I had no opposition to continuing the city meeting in the ad hoc committee as long as it was not a substitute for the full body's meeting to discuss the outcome of the master park study and what might be done. So we can continue to meet, but I think our focus and our accomplishments are going to be less than we have done previously.
I think you also made a good point that there's some unfinished business and we shouldn't let that drop. And so I would probably see this extension of 6 months as kind of a sunset for ad hoc. Because I think you're right, Stephen, about, actually it's two conversations. I don't think ad hoc should be the other conversation about city and county and the master plan. But ad hoc has unfinished business, and there's still some interest there in doing that. So,
And I think if those are clearly articulated and followed, then there's no harm there. I think what we need to be careful is about the expectation and the role and responsibility of any committee that is formed jointly, and the larger role that the commission and county must play going forward, without deferring what I would consider a critical component and charge to each body independently.
Ron, when you had that discussion with the county, what was the feedback? How was it received?
There was no explicit disagreement with what I had said, but there was no rousing affirmation to it either.
Well, my fear is, I think the point that's been made has been well made, that it should be the elected bodies that make the final determinations on these things. And my fear is that by extending the ad hoc's life, I guess, that it's going to kind of muddy the water at some critical decisions are being made. I don't know, maybe that's incorrect, but.
Well, I share your concern, and I say again, there's very few improvements, maybe a parking lot in pavement or something very minor. And again, if it's in the city and county budget already, they can be administered by staff already. We don't need necessarily the ad hoc committee structure of elected officials to meet and sit and talk about those things. And we have already said by policy or in our budget, we're creating several pots of money for Parks and Recreation, and we're capital improvements and others, and we're waiting really to see what we decide to do with regard to those recommendations before we're going to invest capital improvements further in Millennium Park. So, I mean, we've already said that, I think, in the budget and its adoption and in my message to you on those points. So, again, while we could do it out of some courtesy to the county if they want us to do that, I see the outcomes as being sort of limited by those reasons, really.
That's all.
Any further questions or comments?
Well, the request for extension is coming from both groups, right? The ad hoc committee members from the county and the ad hoc committee members from the city, right?
It was I think, a adopted part of the minutes without opposition at that time.
Okay. That's all right.
If there are no further questions or comments, call for the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Let's revote, because I didn't vote that time. So let's revote if you don't mind.
I don't know.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
I believe we have a reason for executive session relating to personnel.
Yes, sir. The request for an executive session to consider personnel matters.
Do I hear a motion, Commissioner Cottle?
I move that we go into executive session, by golly, in order to discuss a personnel matter pursuant to KRS 61-810-1F.
Do I hear a motion on F?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor of executive session, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Do I hear a motion? We move back into regular session.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We're in regular session. Madam Clerk?
Staff would ask that you hire Crystal Blackburn to the position of 911 operator with the usual probationary measures.
So moved.
Motion made and seconded. Seconded?
Second.
Commissioner Atkins?
Second.
He's got it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
We would also ask that you hire Jacob Farley and Cody Crawford to the position of police officer recruit with the usual probationary measures.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Motion made, second? Seconded?
Second.
Commissioner Sears? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Anything else to come before this group? Don't believe so. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move that we adjourn.
Motion,
Second.
second. All in favor, say aye.
Yo.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We're adjourned.